The Game Boy, the handheld that seemingly every kid either had or wanted. Naturally, being in the Had It Club was definitely preferable. I was in the Wanted It Club for years before I joined the Had It Club, and it almost felt like it defined a part of my childhood. If I see a therapist, first thing I'm bringing up is that I didn't own a Game Boy until 1997. Before then, I remember constantly asking other kids if I could have a turn on their Game Boys, and you guessed it, with not much success. Would you have given me a turn on your Game Boy, knowing it still makes me a little sad all these years later? But nowadays, I have my own Game Boy and don't have to share it with anybody. If only there was anybody to even ask me. Yeah, many people today are in the don't have it and don't want it club. They either moved on to other systems or perhaps even made the mistake of stopping playing video games altogether. If anyone ever tells you their life sucks, tell them it's because they stopped playing their Game Boy. Seriously, there are few things that'll take you back to the days of being a slap-happy school kid like the Game Boy. Now, I'm not saying that the Game Boy doesn't still have its fans, you're looking at one, but times have certainly changed. Question is, why do some people disregard the Game Boy, and can you, the person watching right now, still get some enjoyment out of it? That's what I'm here to answer with a handful of my favorite Game Boy games that I feel are timeless. If you can't get any enjoyment out of these games, then, well, you may just have your answer that the Game Boy is not for you. While the system has its bright spots, there's a lot of stinkers in the Game Boy's library you should watch out for. What you gotta remember is that back when the Game Boy was hot and poppin' in the late 80s and into the 90s, handheld gaming was incredibly novel. Sure, it's still considered novel nowadays as well, but back then it was a much newer concept. I mean, that's how time works. So it seems reasonable to think that even if a game was crappy, the novelty of being able to play it on the go could be enough to make it palatable. I mean, think of just about any activity. Do it on the go, and sure enough, it becomes more interesting. But since some of the Game Boy games that gamers were enjoying on the go were crappy, it gave the green light to publishers and developers to happily provide and charge money for these crappy games, a concept we've seen time and time again. If a console does well, it receives a lot of games, and some of those games are garbage, or as some people like to call it, shovelware. The PS2 and we say, hi! You just gotta dig around the bad stuff and go for the good stuff. So, with all that said, the first game I'd like to talk about is Cat Trap, a game that I wouldn't necessarily say is underrated because most people don't even know about it. The people who do know about it tend to love it, and you can count me in. In this game, you're trying to figure out how to reach all the enemies in each stage, at which point you bop them off the screen. And reaching them often requires moving blocks and obeying various physics mechanics to do so. One area where I feel like the Game Boy really shined was games that incorporated puzzle mechanics. Puzzle mechanics allow you to slow down and think, without things needing to move super fast on screen, all the while keeping your brain engaged. Now, listen, I get it. When some people hear the word puzzle, they immediately think, oh great, problems to solve. Exactly what I like doing for fun. But pretty much every video game ever made requires problem solving of some kind. Think about it. Cat Trap manages to still feel a bit like a platformer as well, except instead of jumping, you can fall. Oh well, the most fun part of jumping is falling anyways. But perhaps the marquee feature of Cat Trap is the time mechanic, where you can rewind time if you mess something up, which encourages experimentation because you can do it as many times as you want. Convenient, right? And being able to rewind time in a video game just makes sense, since one of the big advantages of video games is that you can do awesome things that aren't possible in real life, like jumping 3 times your height without bending your legs. I'm working on it though. I mean, just imagine all the incredible incredible stuff you could do in real life if you could rewind time. I know what I'd do, that's for sure. Now, the mechanic isn't utilized in quite as elaborate of ways as a game like Braid, but the game also doesn't make you want to smash your controller into your TV the way Braid does, or throw your Game Boy at somebody, I suppose. You know, I would have gladly taken a Game Boy thrown at me as a kid. That could have been how I got a turn. Next game on the list is Tetris, to which some of you might be thinking, oh, Tetris, I used that game to put myself to sleep. That's such a boring choice. Like saying water is your favorite drink. Well, like it or not, there are plenty of people who do like it, and it's going to be around for the long haul. I mean, you've always got time for a round of Tetris. Hey, you know what'll make just about anybody want to play Tetris? Watching somebody else play it and seeing them make all the decisions you wouldn't make. In fact, right now, for some of you, watching how I'm playing may be giving you the urge to do me physical harm. For all the gameplay footage I've shown, and there's been a lot over time, never have I gotten more complaints in the comments than for my gameplay of Tetris. And it's not like I'm even that bad. I've gotten over 100 lines dozens of times. Well, if you've got an opinion on how Tetris should be played, you can always play it yourself. And for those who think it isn't exciting enough, trust me, when you get in trouble as those blocks start getting close to the top, oh, now you give me the long piece, it can get intense. Much like water, get in trouble with your swallowing and things can get exciting real quick. Next up, we've got Wario Land. Every now and then, I hear people say they wish Wario got more attention. Well, if you've ever felt that way, make sure you're giving some of your attention to this game. It's essentially like one of the classic side-scrolling Mario games, but you play as Wario. And I say that because it is, as the full title of the game, Super Mario Land 3, but play as Wario, would imply. Besides the satisfying platforming gameplay you've come to expect from the 2D Mario games, the game includes some unique abilities and power-ups for Wario too, like the good old kids get your earmuffs ready, butt stomp, which I believe is the first quote-unquote Mario game to start the tradition of the tried and true butt stomp, or what's also known as kids can take their earmuffs off now, ground pound, ranking right up there with some of the most important video game footnotes. Next game is Castlevania 2. Wait, but I thought lots of people hated Simon's Quest. Well, whether you hate that game or not, the Game Boy got its very own special Castlevania 2 game called Belmont's Revenge, a game that's out for revenge against the first Castlevania game on Game Boy, Castlevania the Adventure, or as some people like to call it, Castlevania the Disappointment. In Belmont's Revenge, you'll get a much more worthy adventure, full of all the things you love about a solid classic Castlevania game. Powering up your whip, unique enemies, bosses, obstacles, remembering how you feel about flying enemies, and a bit of platforming. The main difference is that instead of stairs, this game has ropes you climb on. So, if a Castlevania game ain't Castlevania to you without stairs, stay away from this one. Otherwise, you're probably going to love it if you like the older Castlevania games. Next game up on deck is Donkey Kong, a classic for sure. This is many people's all-time favorite Game Boy game, so if you're a fan of the Game Boy already, then I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. But if you're somebody who has been ignoring the Game Boy, then this game might just be what convinces you the Game Boy can indeed offer you some enjoyment. The game is basically like the 1981 arcade game, except more fleshed out. Mario has more abilities, like a crazy handstand jump, add that to the list of things I can't do in real life, and there are way more stages too. Additionally, you're not just trying for a high score here. The main objective is to reach the end of the stage by finding both a key and locked door. You carry the key to the locked door, and then the key and locked door do what keys and locked doors do: open up the door. But doing this isn't always so simple. There's various obstacles in the way, and figuring out each stage always presents a unique challenge. A lot of thought went into this game, and so did a lot of stages. My goodness, there's a ton of them. No simple rehashes either. I think Shigeru Miyamoto's mindset with this one was, we're going all in, folks. The last game I'm going to talk about is Link's Awakening. Another game that needs no introduction, and a game that some people might just say, I'll just play the version on Switch. To which I would say, well, that's actually not such a bad idea. But that doesn't mean the original Game Boy release isn't still great. The 2D visuals still hold up, and the Switch remake, despite providing a visual makeover, basically copied the Game Boy game tile for tile. So a big part of the reason why people think the Switch game is so good is because it essentially is the Game Boy game, which is good. Darn good, in fact, being many Zelda fans' favorite 2D entry, which is saying a lot. Fans of the Zelda series tend to play through the games multiple times, so why not play through this version of the game for at least one of those times? That's what I say. And that about does it for the games that I wanted to talk about. Of course, that's certainly not every good game for the original Game Boy. I didn't even mention games like Mole Mania, Kid Dracula, or the Mega Man games. Well, actually, now I did, so never mind. Oh, and Super Mario Land 2. Yeah, there's certainly more good games than just the ones I talked about in this video. But the point of this video was to mention merely some of the games that I think stand the best chance of getting people to see the appeal of the Game Boy, as well as to highlight some of the games that I think stand the greatest chance of being enjoyable forever. If they've stayed cheap this long, you gotta figure they stand a good chance to stay reasonable for at least a while. Also, quick little tip for you: if a game isn't cheap, or you'd just like it to be even cheaper, Game Boy games are region free, and the Japanese versions are almost always way cheaper. So if you can't tolerate paying $9 for Dr. Mario, you can buy the Japanese version for $5. I really hope you all got something out of this video though. I always say the Game Boy is worth considering because it checks a couple of the most important boxes that every retro gamer is looking for. The games have that pick up and play quality, and they're very affordable. Heck, you don't even need a Game Boy to play them. You could just get a Super Game Boy and stick that into your Super Nintendo. But with all that, for fans of the Game Boy, I'd be curious to know which game you would recommend if you were trying to sell somebody on the Game Boy. And for those of you who aren't really fans, which of the games that I mentioned in this video do you think you'd be most interested in? So leave your responses down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's